Thank you very much, John, and thank you very much, IBC and the Awards Committee. I deeply appreciate this. I'm honored. I also want to say thank you on behalf of my employees, my engineers, and other staff, not only now, but in the past, going back 35 years. Many of those people have made the contributions, that have led to the developments that you've seen. When I was a very little boy, I developed a theory about how sound works, or how radios work and gramophones work. There were little people inside of the radio, and they had miniature instruments, and they made the music. But it was all very magical, but at the same time, there was a mystery, very mysterious. How did the little people get fed? And this worried me for some time until my father helped set me straight. He explained to me how gramophones, phonographs work. There's a groove, and the needle is vibrated by that groove, and that vibration is transferred to a diaphragm or to a loudspeaker. And I was awestruck. I thought that was so wonderful. It was a revelation to me. The mystery had disappeared. The magic was still there, but the mystery was gone. I could understand that. That was analog recording. And so I worked with analog recording for the better part of my career, and then came digital. And that was something we all had to learn to cope with. But I discovered something about digital, and that was that the magic was there all right, but the mystery had come back. It's wonderful what digital recording can do. It's very, very practical. It's economical. It's convenient to use. But in order to get those qualities, those advantages, one unfortunately has to give up that wonderful, delightful intuitiveness of analog, which even a little boy can understand. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Tom Dolby. Welcome to a celebration of my father's life. As my mother and my brother and I thought about this event, it struck us that my dad was not someone who had many close friendships. He held his wife, my mother Dagmar, as his closest confidant for the last 50 years, and he believed that our family of 4 was all that he needed. Yet looking out at this crowd, however, he had many, many people who loved and admired him. Unlike many of the other speakers today, my relationship to my father was solely a personal one. I was witness to many private habits and quirks. As a writer, I always look for the telling detail or anecdote about a person's character. There were so many about my dad. He was a man who bought his underwear and socks at Sears, no matter how successful he became. He got $15 haircuts from a barber who offered Playboy magazines as reading material. When confronted with a wine list, he always ordered the second cheapest bottle. The logic being that the cheapest bottle was probably not very good, but the second cheapest would be just fine. When in social situations, most people were struck by how kind Ray Dolby was and how intelligent. He always told us that he did one simple thing to achieve this result. He listened to them. He was genuinely interested in what other people had to say, and he viewed every conversation as an opportunity to learn something. He used to say that one sign of intelligence was that a person asks questions. We grew up being taught to ask lots of questions. Nearly everyone has a Ray Dolby story. I'm sure many of you in this room do. Some more fantastical than others. I was once told by a former literary agent of mine that she had heard that while my father was living in India, in the absence of proper medical care, he had removed his own appendix. This was certainly news to me. But many of the stories are true. I remember my mom telling me about their life in swinging London in the 1960s. One evening, a friend gave them a small marijuana plant. What a nice plant, they thought. Not realizing what it was, my father put it in the bathroom. Countless dinner party guests thought my parents were incredibly hip. Hip or not, my father was always transparent in his parenting. When I was about 6 years old, we were spending an evening on our boat, the Brundle, in the San Francisco Marina. Somehow the conversation came around to swear words. He decided, not with my mother's approval, that he would teach us every curse word he knew, with the caveat that we not use them. He succeeded, mostly. I remember afternoons spent with him on the top floor of our house on Walnut Street, while he worked on his experiments, and my brother and I played nearby. While I didn't always connect with him on a technical level, we did connect over storytelling and the arts. He built me my first stage, a plywood box that could serve multiple theatrical purposes for an 8-year-old. In 2nd grade, he pulled me out of baseball practice, thankfully, for a special visit to a prop and scenery warehouse in South San Francisco. Nearly every time we went to the theater to see a play, he would ask afterwards if a member of the crew would give us a tour of backstage, and they would happily oblige. When I was a teenager, he arranged for me to sit in on a mix session of my favorite television show, Beverly Hills 90210, and later when I was in college for my favorite filmmaker, Woody Allen. After my father's heart attack in 1984, he was told by his doctor that if he didn't change his habits, he wouldn't stay alive. He wanted to live. He began exercising every day for an hour. When he traveled, he never trusted hotel gyms, so he brought along his own fold-up exercise bike that fit into 2 suitcases. It was a nightmare getting through the TSA. Putting it together each morning was no small endeavor. It involved wrenches, screws, and cables, but he was perfectly happy to assemble it. When he learned that the company that made this bike was going out of business, he bought 10 of them just to be sure he would always have one. Nearly 30 years later, we began to lose him to a disease that couldn't be fixed with a change of exercise or diet. When someone is afflicted with Alzheimer's, they don't die all at once. For my family, my father had been disappearing slowly through these last 3 years as his memories faded away. Sadly, so too did some of our memories of the man we grew up with, the man he used to be. So for the past few months, my mother and my brother and I have been in a process of unfurling, of flipping through pages of the scrapbook of his life, recalling the man that he was. That is ultimately the man we will remember. In the end, though, we were very, very fortunate. He always knew who he was, where he was, and who we were. Even in the midst of the leukemia that struck him this past summer, he was headstrong until the end. To my mother's chagrin, even while he was ill, he rewired half the lamps in his study just for fun. One of my father's great loves in his life was music. The first piece on this program, from Mozart's Clarinet Concerto, is one that's very special to our family. My father had started learning to play the clarinet in high school. When he met my mother in June 1962 in Cambridge, he was teaching himself this piece. The first time she visited him in his rooms at Pembroke College, he played it for her. I wanted to read for you part of a letter that my father wrote to my mother during this time, after she had gone back to Heidelberg University. He had just turned 30 years old. Pembroke College, Cambridge, January 22nd, 1963. Dagmar, darling, it is rather late now. We have had a college meeting for 2.5 hours this afternoon, followed by our usual Good Tuesday dinner. I returned about 9:30 and have been playing my clarinet for over an hour. In the past half hour, I've just been polishing and cleaning it, which is half the fun. I can play most of the Mozart Concerto now. How are you, little kitten? I wish you were with me now. I miss you very much. You're such a satisfying woman to be with. I look forward very much to seeing you again, which I hope will be soon. Lots of love, Ray. I will miss my father very much. Thank you.
Good afternoon, I'm David Robinson. Ray Dolby, brilliant engineer, wonderful physicist, inventor, philanthropist, and friend. Not many people get their name into the Oxford English Dictionary. I first met Ray in 1960 in Cambridge, where he was working on a PhD, and I was just a lowly undergraduate. We both shared an interest in tape recording, audio tape recording. I didn't at that time know that he was probably the principal engineer of video tape recording, another of his brilliant inventions which completely changed the current practice. Universities provide a huge opportunity for recording, making music, and listening to music. And indeed, one of my first recollections of Ray was helping him in the dead of night, laying microphone cables from the college chapel round the old court, and rather illegally and certainly rather dangerously, in order that he could record in his rooms on D staircase what was going on in the chapel. For all I know, those cables are still there today. I'll have to ask the master later on this afternoon. Our paths crossed again in 1966 when he was demonstrating a video noise reduction system to the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation. By a very fortuitous case, it was in the very department that I was working in, so that we met again. Very shortly after that, he invited me to join his small company. It was a very exciting time, but also rather scary, but not for Ray. Almost 40 years later, I was at the IPO in New York and was talking to Ray at a party afterwards and reminding him of those early days. And I said to him, "I'm sure you never thought it would come to this." And I was completely taken aback when he turned to me and said, "Oh yes, I did." So those successes, this vision of what he could do was so terrific that it was a very short space of time that the name Dolby became well known in the professional field, but even more so in the consumer field, and now it's really a household name. In those early days, which I was privileged to share, Ray was busy refining the A-type audio noise reduction system, and one of the best tools that you can have in recording is a piano. Piano is a very interesting instrument. It has a very, very wide dynamic range, and it's also very transparent, so that you can listen around the musical notes and through them. And it's a perfect tool for working out how not to have all the problems that you normally have in noise reduction systems. So my early days there at Dolby Laboratories have very much musical backgrounds and memories, and it gives me a great deal of pleasure to be able to introduce Michael Tilson-Thomas, who is going to play a piece on piano for us. And those audio engineers in the audience here today, you'll understand how you can hear between the notes and how very, very difficult it is to stop the artifacts that can happen with conventional systems, and how brilliantly Ray managed to solve all those problems. Thank you. Michael Tilson-Thomas.
Thank you, everybody. So honored to be here at this wonderful day celebrating Ray. When I think of him, I think of someone who had just incredible energy, incredible inquisitiveness, incredible enthusiasm for everything that he approached. And he had that quality that I just aspire to so much in my own life. He just had this pursuit of uncontestable excellence, which is just something that he in every way found to do in his business. But all you have to do is look at any detail of the theater that exists in Dolby Labs, or anything where his vision could be, and you could see the beautiful perfection and elegance that he brought to it. And we were always aware here at the Symphony when he attended the concerts, because he really did love music, all kinds of music, and very much classical music, as you've been hearing today. And his seat was, I think it was an AB, it was there, that's it, box C. That's where he sat. We were very aware of it, just where that light is now. Good evening, ma'am. And He actually wanted to sit towards the back of the box where he thought the sound was best. And he had a special little platform constructed there, so sometime if you're passing by that part of the hall, you might just peek through the doorway. You can see there's the Ray Dolby platform, which is now part of everything. So, you know, he had this wonderful quality, this bubbling, this irresistible twinkle, I think, in his eyes. And I just also want to salute Dagmar, because you can't maintain a lifetime twinkle like that with having a very sympathetic partner, and she's absolutely responsible for so much of that. So thank you all.
Good afternoon. My name is Johan Allen. I had the privilege of working with Ray Dolby from 1969 for about the next 40 years. And when I joined the company, I think I was employee number 20. And our bread and butter was totally created by Dolby Professional Noise Reduction. And what we're going to try and do this afternoon is recreate in 10 minutes a history of some of Ray's inventions, including the first recording which I'm going to play, which is the first ever demonstration tape, recorded I think in 1966. And Ray realized that he had to have demonstration material in order to go from studio to studio and try and sell the idea of Dolby noise reduction. Don't think that noise reduction was new. For years people had tried to make noise reduction, but it was like the Holy Grail. There was always something wrong. You know, that you'd hear the hiss at this point, but you wouldn't hear the hiss at that point. And Ray Dolby's genius was to find a way around the morass of bad, failed attempts to create noise reduction units and create one that actually worked. It took the hiss away without any artifacts. Here's an acoustic guitar recording made at Olympic Studios back in, good heavens. Made at Olympic Studios back in 1966, Olympic Studios in London. And you'll hear two guitar pieces played, the first one with the hiss still there, the second one with the hiss removed. And then another two guitar pieces, very short, this time with the very sotto voce, very quiet guitar. And you can hear how the hiss has totally submerged the guitar notes. And in the second version, you'll hear how the music stands clean with the hiss removed. John, can we play the tape, please?
Take one. Take two. Take one. Take two.
For years, it was common for us all to decry the quality of the black vinyl record. But actually the black vinyl record was and is still pretty good. And before the days of Dolby noise reduction, the limiting quality on the black vinyl record was the tape that came before it. It was the hiss. So what happened when Dolby noise reduction became popular in the classical industry was the opportunity for the first time to record the entire dynamic range of an orchestra. And previously, the quietest sounds had to be raised up to get them above the hiss. Now it's possible to have the full dynamic range of the orchestra without any constriction. Now we can play the piece of Tchaikovsky, please. One of the most significant figures in our progress in the late 60s was Mr. Jack Holtzman. Jack founded Elektra Records. He's the person who signed The Doors, Carly Simon, Harry Chapin, Judy Collins. And he was the first to use Dolby noise reduction on non-classical music. He later was responsible for merging Elektra with Warner Communications and finished up running Panavision, and is still alive and well and kicking, and made this recording. Tape, please.
Ray solved the nagging problem of distracting tape hiss with a solution so elegant it amazes me still. Elektra always used Dolby A on all of our multi-track recordings, from Judy Collins to The Doors, and not always the way that Ray had intended. The Doors' Light My Fire in stereo was beautiful and open on a Dolby tape, but coming through the limited frequency range plus compression of AM radio required a real boost, so we encoded the track with Dolby A, using its dynamic preemphasis to intensify impact, and we never resolved it. It certainly worked. The Doors' Light My Fire with Dolby A in tandem kept Light My Fire on the chart for 10 weeks until it made it to #1. Ray and I also shared a love of flying. He owned aircraft I could only lust after. But I think the most massive attraction of flying to Ray was that if he had lived to 200, he never could have mastered it all. Pilots believe that other pilots never die. They remain aloft forever, heading west to a sunset that never happens. I like to think that the guardian muse of pilots might have murmured these final words to him. Citation 88 Golf, cleared for takeoff. Maintain westerly heading as requested. Contact departure control at infinity plus pi. Have a good flight. Have a very good flight, Ray.
Here's a very short excerpt from Judy Collins' album, one of the first recordings using Dolby noise reduction on non-classical music. Tape, please. Continually inventing. What you've been listening to so far has been Dolby A-type noise reduction, which is the first professional noise reduction system. Ray went on to develop B-type, which is the consumer noise reduction, which I'll talk about in a minute, C-type. For 5 years, he worked on a development that we called spectral recording, SR, which was completed in 1986. And it was a lot more than just a noise reduction system. Spectral recording was a whole process on an analog tape recorder attached to the analog tape recorder, which made for a recording quality that I think is still unreachable by any other current recording technique today. It's very expensive by today's standards compared to digital, which is very cheap, but I still think it was the most exquisite recording quality. And you'll notice in this little bit of music I'm about to play you, it is more than just the reduction in hiss. It is the cleanliness of instruments like the sound of a cymbal or sound of an organ that makes you there, gives you a feeling of immediacy that was never possible previously. 1986, a recording done by Chris Mitchie, Dolby SR, recorded here in the city at Russian Hill Studios. Music, please. Ray was very economical in terms of his circuit design. It was both in terms of the minimum necessary to achieve the results you want, and also in terms of the least treatment of the signal, the principle of least treatment, he used to call it. And that was what made possible both the quality of SR, but also for those of us who lived in the days of the cassette, the B-type noise reduction system that was so cheap and simple to install in a cassette that made it ubiquitous. I can't see all your hands, but I bet you if I asked you how many people in this room had a cassette machine with Dolby noise reduction, I would bet 75% of you would raise your hands. Consumer technology. Think about it, in the last 20 years, how many times have you seen a Dolby logo in a typical day? In the street, in the car, on TV, in the cinema, in the home? Recent question from a journalist: how did his inventions go from technical, professional solutions to things consumers recognized and became a part of the popular culture? Well, entertainment technology has a natural chain from professional to consumer. Our activities with professional noise reduction in the recording studios led naturally to consumer noise reduction on the cassette machine. Dolby stereo in the cinema led naturally to Dolby surround in the home. What is my experience of Ray's character? Well, extremely thorough. The opposite of a hacker. No rapid fire trying different bits of code. He would methodically plan a technical investigation. Meticulous note taker. By and large, his inventions were triggered by his own interests and not necessarily for economic gain. For example, analog tape noise reduction was triggered by his own experience of recording. The company's move into film sound was stimulated by his interest in music in movies. Even though he could be said to have been humble, this was tempered with a calm confidence. He would know that an invention and development was right, and that even though there was no traction at that moment in the marketplace, would be sure that in due course things would work out, and almost invariably he would be right. Was he worldly? Well, or not. Monty Python's Life of Brian was being mixed in London's West End. A visit is arranged for Ray to accompany the Dolby consultant to the mix stage. The Monty Python team were all very keen and delighted to meet the iconic Ray Dolby. Ray Dolby was equally keen and delighted to meet the iconic Monty Python team. Ray then whispers to the Dolby consultant, "Which one is Monty Python?" Ray could be a bit stubborn. We managed to secure the promise of an order for a large number of noise reduction units for the Rank organisation in the UK. Our first big order for the cinema market. I felt we needed a customised unit with features specifically for the cinema marketplace. Ray felt that for a little company like ours, we should avoid a proliferation of product line. Make a single unit for every market. Ray wanted to use our standard Model 360 noise reduction unit in the cinema. Ray, you can't do that. It has a record button. Every projectionist is going to push the button to see what happens. And some of them will leave the button engaged, resulting in a strange sounding and a double encoded soundtrack instead of a correctly decoded soundtrack. I guess I was pushing too hard because, well, Johan, get an artwork made for a sticky label that says, "Don't push this button." Lesson learned, don't push back too hard. One of our achievements, Ray's achievements, was the different areas in which his inventions could be used. And, you know, Dolby stereo, the quality that brings to film sound, had a lot of components, but the thing that's at the heart of it that makes the whole thing possible was Dolby noise reduction. And the same thing applies to Dolby surround in the home, which is still the ubiquitous logo that is in every one of your homes. I'm going to ask up three industry giants to join me up here on the stage. Mr. Sid Ganis, Mr. Walter Murch, and Mr. Mickey Hart. Gentlemen, would you come upstairs? I'm going to introduce Sid Ganis to start talking to us first. Sid and I have known each other for, heaven knows, 35 years perhaps. Yes. And he is one of the people in the film industry who taught me a lot and for whom I have enormous respect, and was also very friendly with Ray. Sid, you're on.
Thank you, Johan. Thank you very much. I was asked to talk about Ray as he related to the motion picture industry, the movies. You know, that vast worldwide group of artists and scientists who have been perfecting the motion picture art form for the past 100 years, more than 100 years, and who are the beneficiaries of Ray's genius. Those of us who have been working in this industry all our lives know Dolby intimately. We know Dolby. We know it intimately. The thing is, we know it. We may not have known the man, but we know it. For 35 or 40 years now, we all breathe a little bit easier when we know that our film is in Dolby. We hear, it's in Dolby. That's very, very comforting to us. We may not have known Ray, the visionary, personally, but we know that what he has created has freed us up to explore our wildest ideas about moving audiences. It's about his science. His science, along with his love for movies and his love for music, has given us an even greater and sometimes almost unimaginable ability to move audiences emotionally. He offers the film artists the tools to heighten the experience. Because movies are in Dolby, the emotional buttons are more easily pushed. To make us laugh, to make us cry, to scare the pants off of us, to take us even closer to the edge of our seats. A very good example of that is Steven Spielberg and John Williams. When they were doing Close Encounters in 1977, they gave us those amazing sounds when the alien ship landed at Devil's Towers and talked to us through those incredibly powerful electronic tones. It took our breath away, didn't it? Those tones are in Dolby. To this day, Stephen and John Williams say they couldn't have done it without Ray's inventions. So, you know, many of us might have not known the visionary personally, but we know Dolby, and we know what it means for our work to be in Dolby. On the other hand, George Lucas knew Ray and was among the very first in the film business to partake of his imagination. Have a look.
As an ardent fan of cinema sound, I have a great appreciation for what Ray Dolby contributed to our industry. Without Ray's hard work and scientific know-how, Star Wars would not have been the event and the experience that it turned out to be. We were with Ray in the very beginning when they started to roll out the Dolby systems in the theaters, and it, I think, had an immense impact on the quality and enjoyability of the movie. His contributions will, I think, live on forever in the movie business.
Thank you, George. I would now like to introduce you to the renowned Oscar-winning film editor, sound designer, director, Mr. Walter Murch.
Thank you. The Bay Area was the beachhead for the arrival of magnetic recording just after World War II, courtesy of Jack Mullen, who smuggled the first magnetophones back from Germany and brought them to Ampex, where there was a teenager, Ray Dolby, who immediately latched on to this new invention and figured out ways to improve it. And as you've been hearing, many improvements were made. However, none of them percolated through to what you would hear in the theaters. The Godfather, which we mixed in 1972, really had exactly the same optical soundtrack quality, technical quality, that Gone with the Wind had in 1939. And there are many reasons for this stagnation. Basically, it was that the film studios had abandoned the kind of research and development that they had historically done. And it was Ray and Johan, Dolby Labs, in the 1970s who filled in this vacuum and essentially created the research and development arm of the motion picture industry. And it's not just the quality, which we've been hearing here, which is indisputable, but because of this abandonment, when I entered the film business in the late 60s, there was really no standard. You would go into one theater and it would be at one level. You go into another one and that would be completely different. It was basically at the whims of whoever was operating the theater. And so one of these hidden side effects of the Dolby move into motion pictures was the Dolby tone, what we know as Dolby 7, which was just a iron guide to how the film should be played at what level and what frequency response. I've heard my first Dolby film in London. I was working in London in the mid-70s, and I think it was Mahler, I think, 1974. Yeah. And I immediately leapt to it and started investigating this. I met Johan at that time. We were making a film at Elstree in London. And the next film up for me was Apocalypse Now. And Francis Coppola had a revelation about how this film should sound. He wanted it to have, he wanted the sound to move all around the theater, and he wanted the sound to descend into the infrasonic range. He wanted you to feel the sound as much as to hear it. And so when we got back to San Francisco, who naturally to turn to under the circumstances, but Johan and Dolby Labs, which at that time were just 2 blocks away from where Zoetrope Studio was in North Beach. And so together we worked out how to create this dream that Francis had for basically what has become the 5.1, the standard way that films are released. Well, over the next 30 years since Apocalypse Now, 35 years, as Johan has been saying, there have been all these fantastic improvements and breakthroughs. Just a year ago, 2 years ago, the advent of Dolby Atmos, which gives a virtually uncountable number of different channels that filmmakers can use. But when we look back on the history of film sound, which is roughly 80 years since the first motion picture had film sound, right in the middle of that 80-year stretch is Dolby. And you can look at all the films that have ever been made that have soundtracks, and you can ascribe a BD or an AD to them before Dolby or after Dolby. So I've lived almost my entire creative life, as Sid was saying, with Dolby, and for which I give eternal thanks. And I'd like to introduce Mickey Hart.
That's true. Dolby, what do you say about Ray Dolby? Well, I think he was a man in his time. He was the perfect storm. I think the story might begin with when Thomas Edison walked into the patent office in 77, then the first field recording in 1890, And then Emil Berliner took that, made a disc out of it on zinc. And all through the years, each of these mediums have these little gremlins inside talking, and we have to try to silence them, whatever it may be. We've imprinted sound on wax, on glass, on wire, on zinc, yak butter, everything. I made that up, Walter. Sorry. But anyway, each one of these mediums had their problems. And then it does shoot to 1945, when the Nazis were hightailing out of France, and a fellow by the name of Captain Mullins found they were in a big hurry, and they burned everything except one thing, and it was a little magnetic tape recorder, and they left behind. And so we took that, we threw that back into MIT, and that's where magnetic tape came in, and that offered a whole new opportunity, but also it came with its problems. And so here we are in the 60s, trying to imprint a tiny little piece of mylar, little piece of tape with these amazing sounds that were going to knock you out. How could you do that when the gremlins in this case were the hiss? So when that first Dolby walked into my studio and I plugged it in, I heard what it did, it became my magic wand. It became everything to me. I mean, I could pray to that Dolby. It did everything I wanted to do. I mean, we were able for the first time to see inside this music and get that wondrous feeling that you get when it's live. So for that reason and that reason alone, he made all of our lives so much more enriched as far as the sonic quality to it, the wonder that you get playing back music. The funny thing about Ray, he thought he was making the world a lot quieter. Wrong! He didn't make it quieter, he made it a lot louder. And not only did he make it louder, he made it really nice quiet too. So there was the soft side of the Dolby, and then there was the side that we were trying to bring out, you know, the pure music. We would try to imprint this magnetic tape with as much signal as we possibly could, and pretty much failed, mostly, until the first Dolby came. And I can't thank Ray enough for advancing our craft, and you're hearing some of it right now, right here. This is all part of it, the Meyer sound and so forth, and all the things that came after Dolby's very simple expand, contract, expand, contract. Just like the infinite universe, it couldn't have been simpler. And why did anyone not think of it beforehand? I should have thought of this. Anyway, thank you, Ray. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. That's 6 thank yous.
Good afternoon. I'm David Dolby. I'm sincerely proud and honored to speak with you today about my father. Many of you knew him as an iconic inventor, a businessman, a philanthropist, a dutiful son, a loving brother, and a devoted husband to his wife, my mother. Above all else, he was my dad. He lived life to the fullest, and perhaps his greatest gift to me and to our daughters was his vision. It's never too soon. It's never too late to live your passion, to work hard on achieving your dreams. Growing up, there was music. He loved to play music through the day and into the night. Dad's seat at the dining table was always an arm's length away from the volume knob. He wanted to be sure that the sound levels were just right at every meal. He described how perfect and complex classical music was. Every instrument requires special attention to record and to reproduce. He challenged us to identify the instruments in each recording: the clarinet, the oboe, the French horn. From his various home experiments, he had tambourines, cymbals, guitars, and even his old clarinet for us to sample. He would show us his gramophone player, his 8mm projector, and his antique wax recordings. And he taught us how to carefully preserve them. Growing up, his technology was a constant presence in our home. He was fiercely independent and did most of his work in his home laboratory. His workbench was as delicate and as complicated as the cockpit of a spaceship. As a young boy, I didn't know where the spaceship was headed. During the development of C-type and SR noise reduction, the sounds of his test tones were as regular as the foghorns on San Francisco Bay. Waiting for him to take a break from his experiments, I would impatiently build forts with the sofa cushions, trying to hide from all the loud sounds. I would then leap onto his chair to see what help I could offer. After helping coil cables or refasten his cardboard sun visor over his oscilloscope, he would let me vacuum the solder off his desk. He thought that was great, good wholesome fun. Well, he would tell me though, there will be someday, there will be time to get out to the park or to take trips. He taught me to be patient. He ran miles of cables throughout the walls of our house. His plan was to host music recitals in the living room while making recordings from his lab on the top floor. That plan never actually happened, but he did engineer a PA system so he could talk to our dogs from his bedroom when they would bark outside. I would only later realize what a special experience this was to watch him for hours and hours, working away, calculating, drafting, soldering, clamping, playing back various sounds, and then checking the results. At the start of most family trips, we would wait in the garage with the car packed. At the last minute, Dad would emerge with a new roll of circuit drawings and specifications for the bike messenger to pick up. He would take them back to the office and have them assembled while he was away. One of his dreams was to experience the world with his own two hands. After all those years grinding away in his lab, the open road was finally in front of him. He took 2 years to build a 40-foot bus that he used to take our family around America. It was a motor coach with an entertainment system that rivaled any home theater, complete with headphone jacks at each bunk bed, and enough storage tanks and battery banks to be prepared for any length of journey. One of his proudest inventions on the bus was built from necessity. He designed a standing well that allowed him to drive the bus with full control, either sitting or standing, so that he could stretch his legs for a few minutes every hour. And in his systematic way, no design was complete without also applying for a patent. The bus design and construction was an engineering marvel which gave him great joy. He showed me how to design things the way you want them to be, to chart your own course, and to pursue what excites you. His interests then led to more boats and then airplanes. He had dreamed of flying all these years. With a childlike enthusiasm, he began studying and researching everything there was to know about aviation and how to combine technology with seeing the world. Dad began flying airplanes, and within a few years he was crossing the Atlantic, single pilot, single engine. I also became a pilot. I was able to share co-pilot duties with my father across 19 countries through North America, Europe, and Africa. Along with my mother and brother, we traveled the world together. We attended conventions, family reunions, and we explored the far corners of the world. As pilots say, we logged a lot of engine hours together. These long conversations up in the air and on the road were priceless. To Ray Dolby, the smell of kerosene was the smell of freedom. It is no mystery that my mother, Dagmar, was his perfect complement. Together for 50 years and married for 47, They took their adventures through life as a team. My mother supported my dad at every turn. While living in India, my father had damaged his Volkswagen Beetle in an accident. He quickly found another damaged Beetle for sale and engineered a solution that would weld the two good halves of each car together. This creative solution worked, and in 1965, my parents took an epic journey that cemented their lives together. They drove from India across the continent and back through Europe. They continued to drive that gray Beetle for several more years while establishing the company in London. With admiration and trust, Mom provided unconditional love and confidence in him. This was not always easy. He always believed in carrying a map. He always read the user manual. My dad always carried a bag with what he saw as essential items for everyday life. He never left home without a full complement of tools and gadgets, which included a multimeter, pliers, and a full set of screwdrivers. He would go to great lengths to fix and repair just about anything. Ray Dolby did not need to call tech support. In the same meticulous way that he prepared his bag, he also charted a path in life that worked for him, regardless of what others thought. He cherished being an engineer, and Dolby Laboratories was his baby. He established his own university of problem solvers. He and his team would focus on innovation, developing useful technology. And well beyond his days of designing analog circuits, his weekly office visits gave him a chance to check in with his engineers and continue to inspire. My dad was so proud of the work that so many of you in this audience have done on behalf of his company. He was the kind of person who never sought attention, but who freely gave his time and his advice to others. He treated everyone the same way, with dignity and respect, always considering their points of view. He always focused on concepts before details, and he believed that everyone played an important part in making the world a better place. Solving practical and technical problems was his contribution. More recently, we would talk about fatherhood. He recognized the importance of guiding his children with questions. He believed in our education, but was very open-minded about where we were headed. He always encouraged me to try new things, especially when the journey was uncertain. I am grateful for everything Dad taught me, for his optimism, his patience, his beautiful mind, his sense of adventure, and for believing in me. I am so very proud of him and hope that today you will all remember the man that he was, disarming and persuasively honest, unpretentious and approachable, charming and tenaciously curious about ideas and concepts. I look forward to telling my daughters about his impact on me as a role model and a friend and the best father in the world. Dad, in our memory and in our hearts, your engine burns that kerosene forever.
I recognized, I suppose by the age of 20 or so, that I was a different kind of person. I was an inventor.
There would be circuit diagrams in my mind and operating curves and characteristics in my mind, whatever I was doing.
And really I had to have a vehicle through which I could work. And it really started out with my desire to have a lab of my own. It was really through my own recording of music, especially in Cambridge, where there were many choral and musical societies. Noise was a continuing problem. And no matter how finely tuned your tape recorder was, how much trouble you took getting everything right, there was this sort of fundamental physical brick wall of noise. It's like the grain on the film.
I thought, I'm going to figure out a noise reduction system and develop that. So I just had to charge ahead on blind faith, and it worked out. And everybody was delighted, of course. And so I was on my way to having a viable company. Well, I think certainly an interest in technology from my father, and from my mother, an interest in music. It was a source of joy for everyone.
I've played the usual 2 years of piano as a little child, and then I went on to a clarinet because that gave me an opportunity to play in an orchestra. So that gave me some feeling for music and its importance to people.
I loved working on mechanical things like my bicycle, and then my motorcycles, and then cars. I liked to make things, build things. My high school had a very remarkable audiovisual program. I was working on a projection crew, and an elderly gentleman came in who was Alexander Poniatoff, the founder of Ampex. He said, tell me about yourself and what you're interested in and things like that. And I did that. And he said, you know, I have an electronics company. I've just started manufacturing professional audio tape recorders. By the end of my junior year, look, I have this wonderful opportunity to work at Ampex Corporation. How would it be if I go to high school for 3 hours? And so I went to work for Ampex for 5 hours a day.
I took the opportunity to work on the Ampex video tape recorder project in 1952, when I elected to stay with the project and not go back for the fall term at university. That got me drafted about 6 months later.
I was a U.S. Army instructor in electronics, and I also spent all that time in India teaching and coaching. And I realized that education was the most important aspect of the endeavors of a company, a technology company. The videotape recorder was the most successful product that they ever had. Meanwhile, I had already resolved that I wanted to strike out in one further new direction in my life before I settled down, and that was to go to an underdeveloped country and work in it for a while. I settled on India. I had taken my Ampex 600 recorder with me to India. I was working for the United Nations there, and I realized that noise was going to be a fundamental stumbling block in all of this. And I took a trip to Far East, spent 2 months doing that, visiting various manufacturers that I was interested in, because I knew I wanted to set up a company, you see. So I thought it would be good to find out what's happening in Japan. And of course I was blown away by what I found there. In driving overland from India back to England, I became so fascinated with this concept of noise reduction. I began to think about this problem of noise on magnetic tape. I kept churning this over and over in my mind. I finally figured out a way of jumping around this noise problem. One doesn't need noise reduction whenever there are high amplitude signals because of the psychoacoustic masking effect of the human ear. You need noise reduction only when the signal is very quiet. But I could get the noise reduction that I needed when the ear demanded it, and I didn't do anything to the signal when the ear said, I can't hear any noise anyway. and I stopped in Kabul, Afghanistan, and spent some days writing up these ideas. I wrote it up in Kabul and mailed it in Kandahar and sent them off to my patent attorney in California, the same one that I had used in connection with the videotape recorder. By the time I arrived there, I put out of my mind immediate thoughts of X-ray equipment and resolved to design a noise reduction system. I think a lot of people have this simultaneous interest in the arts and technical things. Most of the people working here at Dolby Labs are characterized by that combination. The system I'm most proud of is the SR system. I set out to design that in 1980. I thought, I've got the time to do this now, and I'm going to make the best noise reduction system I know how to do, and I've got lots of ideas.
So once you become very intensely involved in a new development like that, you don't leave it as soon as you leave your laboratory or office. It stays with you. I would think about it practically all the time. If I went to the opera or the symphony, for example, I could still generate ideas.
And I spent 6 years developing that system until we demonstrated it for the first time at the AES in Montreux. I continued to work on that for another 2 years to work out all the production. So I'm very proud of that SR system.
Once people are made aware of the possibility of an improvement, then they increase their sensitivity and their expectations. And I think the main significance of our development is that we've given the producer, the director, the sound designer much more freedom in what they can do on every single film they make. It took quite a number of years before there were enough soundtracks available with our encoding. By the mid-'80s, a new market began to develop, that of surround sound, and that has become quite important now. Oh yes, there are 6 discrete channels: left, center, right, right surround, left surround, and a subwoofer channel to create the loud explosions and things like that.
I think that if you've done quite a number of things in your childhood, if you've mowed enough lawns and washed enough dishes in the local restaurant and that sort of thing, you learn to become a kind of jack of all trades. And really, I think that's what you have to be if you want to start and run and hold on to a business.
I just am not, you might say, an instinctive businessman. I'm more of a technically oriented person who just takes satisfaction in solving technical problems. My wife Dagmar sometimes asks me why I bother to go to all the trouble to fly my own airplane. I say, look, flying an airplane is solving a sequence of problems, a problem-solving process that just keeps going and going and going. And it's so much fun to solve those problems. That's why I fly an airplane.
We were born before the wind, also younger than the sun. Yeah, the bonnie boat was one as we sailed into the mystic. Oh, I can now hear the sailors cry. smell the sea and feel the sky. Let your soul and spirit fly into the mystic. When that foghorn blows, you know I will be coming home. And when that foghorn whistle blows, I gotta hear it, I don't have to fear it. And I rock your gypsy soul, just like way back in the days of old. And together we will float into the mystic. Come on, girl. Too late to stop now.
Let me introduce now a special guest from England, who is Vice Chancellor of Cambridge University. Vice Chancellor of Cambridge University when he got to know my father. Please welcome Lord Alec Roars.
Thank you, Dave. I first learned about Ray relatively late in time, when thanks to his companders, the cassette became capable of high fidelity. And I bought a Nakamichi recorder in the 1970s. I'd been building hi-fi sets since my teens, and had even had a small business making them for rich farmers in Australia in the 1950s. But I didn't know much about magnetic recording, and I wanted to know how Ray had magically removed the hiss. I found 2 of his papers on the subject, and was immediately struck with the elegance of his solution, especially the way he used the characteristics of relatively simple transistor circuits to bring about this remarkable result. He became one of my heroes. I subsequently learned that he obtained a PhD in the famous Cavendish Laboratory in Cambridge. I'd come just 4 years later, but missed him. I obtained a PhD in the University Engineering Department. During his PhD, Ray solved the problem of identifying low atomic weight materials, such as carbon, this was very important, in electron microscopes. He did this by using the tiny characteristic X-ray signal that they produced. The challenge he had to meet was to extract this signal from the background noise produced by the rest of the sample. He succeeded. He always succeeded. Fast forward a few years, and you see that the seed was sown. If he could do this, then surely he could, returning to his earlier interest in magnetic recording that he developed while working at Ampex, get rid of this unwanted hiss produced by random variations in magnetic tape. Now, studying for a PhD at Cambridge is challenging. You're surrounded with incredibly creative people. Ray was a member of a group working on electron microscopes led by the famous electron microscopist Ellis Coslet. But it is largely up to you to find an aim for your research and a means of achieving it. Needless to say, Ray excelled in this environment. And his PhD research so impressed everyone that he was offered a prestigious research fellowship in Pembroke College. As a colleague and friend of his, Peter Hawkes, recently said, he was delighted with the fellowship and with his panelled rooms in Pembroke. Indeed, life for Ray must really have been grand, because it was at this time in Cambridge that he met Dagmar, his love and companion for life. For me, he was the ultimate engineer's engineer. Engineers are not always easy to live with, but Dagmar seems to have even enjoyed his obsessions. He was not content until he understood how things worked, not only inanimate things like scientific instruments, but animate things like human beings. If you think about it, his audio advances all rely on a detailed understanding of the human auditory system. His brother Dale has told me of early experiments he and Ray carried out probing the way the human ear behaves. But it was not only audio and video things that interested him. Take, for example, the Dolby bus, with its standing driving platform that David just told you about and you saw in that marvelous video. My wife Mary and I had the huge pleasure of meeting Ray and Dagmar at their house on Scott Street 17 years ago, and that magnificent bus was parked outside. And while showing me the cockpit, he turned to me and said, "Alec, at our age, don't you find that sometimes you get sleepy on a long drive? Well, here's my solution. The seat disappeared, the steering wheel rose up. You drive the bus standing up. You see, you can't sleep standing up." Once more, he had relied upon the characteristics of human physiology to solve a problem. I shared with Ray a love of boats and the water. He took to the air in his later years, becoming a skilled pilot in planes and helicopters, as you know. But while at Cambridge, he and Dagmar sailed the windy coasts of Britain and Europe. More recently, on the waters of Lake Tahoe, they enjoyed that beautiful antique speedboat you saw in the pictures that was housed in the original dockhouse that had been built when their lovely home had been built. This brings to mind another story that tells you a lot about Ray. This dock did not survive by magic. As with all wooden piles in fresh water, the wood rots at the air-water interface and they need to be replaced, which normally requires replacing the whole structure. This is frustrating because the wood that remains deprived of oxygen under the water does not rot, and the wood above that does not remain wet also does not rot. So how did Ray take advantage of this? Well, he went out and bought a chainsaw. He extended it so that it could cut underwater. He cut the piles underwater a couple of feet, then using steel braces attached the new upper halves of the piles, replacing them one by one, and the whole dock was restored. If a solution to a problem existed, Ray would find it. Ray was a genius who combined a brilliant technical mind with a breadth of knowledge that bridged between the capabilities of advanced electronics and human physiology. The products of his creativity enriched all of our lives, and it is a privilege to have been able to participate in this celebration of his wonderful life. Dagmar, thank you for inviting me, and congratulations to you and your family on this magnificent event.
Thank you, Alec. And now we will hear from Bob Klein, who came to know my father as a philanthropist. Bob will speak about my father's pioneering support for stem cell research. Bob?
Thank you, Dave, and good afternoon. Ray Dolby has been honored today for many achievements. I am here to celebrate and honor Ray Dolby for his critical, pivotal role in the stem cell revolution as a philanthropist of extraordinary vision and generosity. While Ray could not escape Alzheimer's, he could look to the future of medical breakthroughs that might protect his family and all of our families from Alzheimer's, but also cancer, heart disease, age-related blindness, and other diseases that have plagued mankind for millennia. For California's Stem Cell Research and Cures Initiative, when I met Ray, he had done his research. Ray and Dagmar had already made a major donation to establish California's Proposition 71 Stem Cell Research Headquarters in San Francisco. On the Stem Cell Initiative, his question was not, should I give, but where would the greatest impact of a gift be? For we could all, each of us, live generations without such an opportunity to change the future of human suffering. Ray knew this opportunity was unique, priceless. How could his gift critically lift the chances for success? First, when an extreme religious group filed a constitutional challenge to the initiative to try and defeat the voter stem cell research mandate through the courts, Ray and Dagmar funded the agency's legal and administrative costs throughout the litigation to move the research forward, to keep the revolution alive until a court victory freed up the funding. Second, when UCSF initiated their request for a stem cell institute, Ray's central question was, what would it take as a lead gift from Ray and Dagmar to empower UCSF to be a world leader on this mission? Human stem cell trials have now started for heart disease and cancer, for age-related blindness, and funding has been committed to bring Alzheimer's to human trials in less than 34 months. One of the greatest gifts anyone can give their children is to spare them from the suffering from their parents' generation. For the vision and generosity that drove Ray Dolby on behalf of all of our children, I say thank you to Ray Dolby. Thank you to the Dolby family for Ray and Dagmar's gifts for all children. Here in San Francisco, his beloved city, and throughout the world. Ray's generosity will reduce human suffering and change the quality of life, the human condition, forever. Thank you, Ray.
On behalf of our family, I will now take this opportunity to thank everyone who's been involved with today's tribute to Ray, the celebration of his most wonderful life. From our distinguished speakers today, thank you to everyone who is involved at Dolby Laboratories. They've gone through all of our home footage. We've gone through hundreds of hours of review of photographs and videos.
All of it.
It was important to us that we could help Ray tell his own story in his own words, and I really want to provide a special thanks to the video team and the sound design team that made that possible. Thank you very much. Also, as you enjoy a drink in the lobby celebrating Ray, please take some time to review the various photographs that were selected. Many of them you saw on the screen today, but all of them have been captioned with accurate descriptions by my mother. So you can learn even more about the context of each of those photos. Finally here, I'd like to thank John Keyser from the San Francisco Symphony and Michael Tilson Thomas. Thank you for helping us put this event together, and I'll turn it over to my brother.
As you've probably gathered by now, our parents lived in London from 1965 to 1975. For my dad, much of this time was defined by its music, but it wasn't just any music. The music he would play had to be really interesting and distinguished. The Moody Blues were the quintessential band for my father. They expanded rock's sonic and lyrical horizons and were fortunate to share some of his favorites. Please welcome from the Moody Blues, the one and only Justin Hayward.
Thank you very much. Real privilege to be here. Thank you, Dagmar. Thank you for inviting me to be part of it. I've got to go over there and get a guitar now.
Once upon a time, once when you were mine, I remember blue skies reflected in your eyes. I wonder where you are, I wonder if you think about me. Once upon a time, in your wildest dreams. Once the world was new, our bodies felt the morning dew that reached the brand new day. We couldn't tear ourselves away. I wonder if you care, I wonder if you still remember. Once upon a time, in your wildest dreams. I hear the sound I had to follow. Once upon a time, once beneath the stars, the universe was ours. Love was all we knew, and all I knew was you. I wonder if you know, I wonder if you think about me. Once upon a time, in your wildest dreams. I hear a sound I had to follow. Once upon a time, once upon a time, once when you were mine. I remember the sky reflected in your eyes. I wonder where you are, I wonder if you think about me. Once upon a time, in your wildest dreams, in your wildest dreams.
dear friends of mine who worked with us in the Moody Blues, Julie Reagans, and Alan Hewitt, and especially with us tonight on flute is Carmen Suter. This is a song that, for me as a songwriter, when I first joined the Moody Blues, this was the first song as a writer that I ever had a real big hit with, and here in the United States. And I wrote it one afternoon. It must have been on a Tuesday. So here we go. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Reflections on my mind. It's just the kind of day to leave myself behind, so gently swaying through the fairyland of love. If you just come with me, you'll see the beauty of Tuesday.
is a song that we had a big hit with in the 1980s, and it was marvelous to be. You know, I kind of missed it in the 60s, the success that we had. I was such an eager young guy, and we were very ambitious and kind of had our heads down and didn't really stop to smell the roses or to see what it was like. And we had another chance, really, with the first song that we did, Wildest Dreams, and then with this song in the 80s, and got on MTV and all of that kind of stuff. And it was just marvelous to actually be conscious, straight, and to be aware of it all. And this is one of the songs that really turned us on.
I know you're out there somewhere, somewhere, somewhere. I know I'll find you somehow, and somehow I'll return again to you. The mist is lifting slowly, I can see the way, and I've left behind the empty streets that once inspired my life. And the strength of the emotion is like thunder in the air, 'cause the promise that we made each other haunts me to the end. I know you're out there somewhere, somewhere, somewhere. I know you're out there somewhere, somewhere you're gonna hear my voice. I know I'll find you somehow, somehow, somehow. I know I'll find you somehow, and somehow I'll return again to you. Of your beauty and the mystery of your soul, I've been searching for in everyone I meet. And the times I've been mistaken, it's impossible to say. And the grass is growing underneath our feet. I know you're out there somewhere, somewhere, somewhere. I know you're out there somewhere, and somewhere you're gonna hear my voice. I know I'll find you somehow, somehow, somehow. I know I'll find you somehow, and somehow I'll return again to you. I know you're out there somewhere. Oh yes, I know you're out there somewhere. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. 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 Well, the words that I remember from my childhood still are true, that there's none so blind as those who will not see. And to those who lack the courage and say it's dangerous to try, well, they just don't know love eternal will not be denied. I know you're out there somewhere, somewhere, somewhere. I know you're out there somewhere, and somewhere you closer again to you.
Just got a couple more things to do. About hate and death and war. 'Cause when we stop and look around us, there ain't nothing that we need in a world of persecution that is burning in its greed. Because the truth is hard to swallow. It's what the war of love is for. It's not the way that you say it when you do those things to me. It's more the way that you mean it when you tell me what will be. And when you stop, think about it, you won't believe it's true, that all the love you've been given has all been meant for you. I'm looking for someone to change my life. I'm looking for a miracle in my life. And if you could see what it's done to me, to lose a love I knew could safely lead me through. Between the silence of the mountains and the crashing of the sea, there lies a land I once lived in, and she's waiting there for me. But in the grey of the morning, my mind becomes confused between the dead and the sleeping, and the road that I must choose. I'm looking for someone to change my life. I'm looking for a miracle in my life. And if you could see what it's done to me, to lose a love I knew could safely lead me into the land that I once knew, to learn as we grow the secrets of your soul. It's not the way that you say it when you do those things to me. It's more the way you really mean it
tell me what will be. Please welcome back the members of the San Francisco Symphony. I was 19 years old when I joined the Moody Blues, and I was also 19 when I wrote this next song. And we were doing this group of songs as a stage show, and we had the marvelous opportunity given to us by Decca, our recording company, and Sir Edward Lewis in England, who we had a debt to. Actually, we owed them some money for some equipment, and they asked us to make a demonstration record to demonstrate this system that was called the Duramic sound system. And their idea was that it would be a full frequency range recording for a rock group for the very first time, and a proper stereo picture, not like the Beatles. Do you remember that? It was like drums over there and the vocals over there. It was, I don't know why they did that in Abbey Road, but at Decca they were just streets ahead. And of course they had the largest, second largest classical catalogue in the world. So their engineers were absolutely brilliant, and we realized this at a very timely moment when the transfer to digital was taking place, and our stuff, I'm proud to say that the Moody Blues recordings, because of that engineering, because those Decca engineers were immaculate, and so transferred to the digital domain perfectly. But when we were charged with this kind of responsibility of doing our own stage show and all of these new songs that we had when we were kids, we realized that what we needed to do, we only had 4-track. They had 4-track, and you would bounce. If you wanted to overdub, you would bounce from 4-track to 4-track. And we knew that this instrument that we had called the mellotron that gave us these kind of orchestral sounds, you needed to track that at least 8 or 10 times. And it was a dilemma for us because we knew that was going to be real noisy, you know, bouncing. That was where you did it, you got a good take, and then you bounced it with your sort of double tracking or something to another 4-track. And once it was done, that was it was committed. By the way, it was very easy for me a few years ago when I came to do the 5.1 surround sound, because I only had 4 tracks. So I just had to make one ambient track in the middle, and that was that. But we knew it was going to be tough for us. But there was a saviour in our midst. And his name was Cyril Windybank. Isn't that right, Dagmar? You know his name. Dagmar knew him. And he was the chief engineer at Decca. And he granted us the privilege of using the new noise reduction system that they had. And you had to sign for this thing every
every recording session. And this outfit with all these racks in it was wheeled in, you know, and you had to log it in and then log it out again. The engineers had to go through this whole palaver. But it made all of the difference, and you know whose system it was. And it made our sound true, and it gave us the opportunity, it gave us a real career in specializing in that kind of sound. And it's thanks to the Dolby system that we used then that that particular album, Days of Future Past, if you've never heard it, just go and have a listen, because you know, it's on iTunes and on Amazon. Have a listen sometime. But it's worth it just to hear the sound quality and the difference from what they were doing down the road at Abbey Road, which was only a couple of 100 yards away. That's enough of that. Here we go. So put yourself back. Anybody who might have been there in that time, it was in the summer of 1967. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Nights once I do, never reaching there. Letters I've written, never meaning to send. Beauty I always miss, with these eyes before. Just what the truth is, I can't say anymore, 'cause I love you. Yes, I love you. Gazing at people, some hand in hand, just what I'm going through, they can't understand. Some try to tell me thoughts they cannot defend. Just what you want to be, you will be in there, and I love you. Yes, I love you. Nights once I do, never reaching the end. Letters I've written, never meaning to send. See, I've always missed with these eyes before just what the truth is. I can't say anymore, 'cause I love you. Yes, I love you.
You know, I never wanted to enhance any experience. All I wanted to do was make the sound as accurate as possible. What goes into the microphone comes out the loudspeaker, without any nonsense in between. So really, our quest has really been to achieve accuracy. And some people imagine that there are other more exotic things that we have in mind, but it's not true.
Thank you to the Academy, to the Board of Governors, and the members of the Scientific and Technical Committee. Thank you very much.
I mean, in a certain sense, I've had a charmed life. I mean, practically everything I've done has worked out. And it makes me very happy and satisfied. With that, I solved a problem that nobody else had been able to solve in the preceding 30 years that they'd been trying. But I don't let it go to my head.
And our last question that we ask all of our interviewees is, how would you like to be remembered?
As a nice guy. And that'd be good enough for me.